That was, home-based businesses have always been a part of what we call the sort of off-the-books economy all over the world. Home-based businesses just in the last 10, 15 years they've basically been overlooked in the literature, and just in the last 10 or 15 years, more has been done on them and in terms of research. And what we know is home-based businesses tend to be very heterogenic. They can be different products, different services. Many times they're based on experimentation. But now we see in the last, especially 6, 7 years, the rise of digital entrepreneurship, home-based digital entrepreneurship. There has been in the last 20 years more businesses online, but these are home-based businesses. And we know that in looking at some literature that's been done just in the last 2, 3 years, some has been done in the United States, some in England, and actually some in the UAE as well, that we know that more and more people entered digital entrepreneurship, and more people took it home because, of course, it's more cost effective. You can buy your own equipment. You're very much in control of your business. It's considered an anytime, any place, anywhere business model. Now, and of course, wealth and job creation. Now with the global dissemination of internet technology, more and more women, particularly we've seen in developing countries, that many times because of social and cultural precepts, obviously they have the main responsibilities of the family. Many are spend a lot of time at home as well. However, many of these women also need, especially in developing countries, they have needed another income in the family as many economies begin to collapse for various reasons. For example, in the economies, developing nations in Africa, because of climate change and the drought, we see more and more poverty, more and more farms going bankrupt, and more farms being seized for political or conflict purposes. So women began entering micro-entrepreneurship to bring a little bit more income into the family. Now, let's race over to today from 10 years ago, where now we are in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of a pandemic which has changed the factors in market, in the world market, in the labor market so greatly. And one thing, of course, we all know is that many of us have had to stay home. We've had to stay home. We've had to work from home. Our children have gone to school from home. And this has brought about in the last year, more so than the last 3 or 4 years where there was a steady rise of digital entrepreneurship from home. Now there's like a rapid rise. And we see that mostly in women's population. We really wanted to do, because I've participated in studies on digital entrepreneurship in the United States and the UK, but having lived in Abu Dhabi and having done so much research and having so many wonderful Arab friends and colleagues, I really wanted to explore what was going on there with women. We wanted to go into a modern Arab, predominantly Muslim country to see the business experiences of today's women digital entrepreneurship in one of those countries. What I'm hoping is at the end of this presentation, if anybody is open to it, we'd really like to work together to replicate our study in other countries too. We went to the UAE because I've lived there. You know, it was easy for me to have resources there to tap into. First, we looked at the literature, and much of the literature really is old. And when I say old, I mean 6 years old, 10 years old. You know, in the entrepreneurship literature today in this fast-paced world, literature that's 6 or 10 years old is old. It's outdated. And we've seen that in these previous studies that looked at women entrepreneurs in Arabic countries, we've seen documented things as much as we've heard. For example, limited encouragement or support from men in the family, a lack of support from spouses, There were even, we saw that many successful entrepreneurial businesses by women, women often felt pressure with balancing family and work life. And often their income, even if they weren't married, often their income was taken and used by male relatives in the family. Now, I really believe that was old research. Not that it doesn't happen anymore, but we wanted to go in and see what's happening with today's woman, a digital entrepreneur. So a couple of my students who live in Dubai were able to conduct 20 interviews of women digital entrepreneurship. Of course, entrepreneurship is easy to study in the UAE. It's a fast growing modern Arab country. There's a multicultural population. We really try to focus on women from Arab countries. We know there's a multicultural population, but we found women from Egypt, Emirati women. We were especially trying to target Emirati women, women from Lebanon, from Syria. We wanted to see what was the state of women's digital entrepreneurship. What were the experiences of these women to start their online business, and what were some of the motivations that led them to their business? What were some of their challenges? We saw a great deal of motivation in these women. Some of them were working on ground and began the online business as a second part-time income. Some of them were not working at all, or were working on ground but weren't happy because of the gender barriers that exist in on-ground corporate life for many women. And all of these women were, I would say, educated. The least had a bachelor's. 2 out of the 20 had doctoral degrees. We saw that digital entrepreneurship really helped them be innovative. That's one thing we really found. They started somewhere with their digital enterprise and they ended up somewhere else. We looked in the literature where we know that very little is known about female digital entrepreneurship. There's been one big study done in England by one woman at Loughborough University, and then another one that is considered seminal done by Anwar, who I've spoken to him. He's a young, really bright Pakistani researcher in England. And he and another British colleague looked more into developing entrepreneurial marketing theory from today's point of view with digital entrepreneurship. They took the classical entrepreneurial marketing theory of Stokes and tried to develop it further to look at online marketing tools for experimenting with promotion, with pricing, and with getting digital entrepreneurs, especially women, to come out of traditional markets, the breakout of traditional markets. We know that when an entrepreneur just stays in a very narrow, homogeneous market, many times those enterprises after a year or two go bankrupt. So digital entrepreneurship has helped these women break out of these traditional small niche on-ground market. And we saw that in some of the women, at least 6 out of the 20 women had started to develop international markets. They were selling their products and services in international markets. And we saw that a lot of the other women wanted to do so as well. Of course, women, the women we talked to all said they wanted more independence. They didn't want to go back into the workplace where there were really traditional figures of authority and a lot of limitations for women. That they kind of saw the corporate world as having rigid hierarchies, especially in their country and in their culture. And it was very important for these women to have more control over their work. So we interviewed 20 women. Their ages ranged from the mid-20s to mid-50s. And I'll just tell you a few of the findings that we saw. First of all, we saw that the women digital entrepreneurs compared to the men tended to be younger. They tended to be more educated. And they pursued on their own knowledge and training. And that's one good thing that we need to push with policy. We need to push for more training, whether it's in communities or in universities or in training centers, for digital entrepreneurship and digital transformation in general. They all identified an online market opportunity. They saw market opportunity, they saw the low startup costs, and they all had, compared to the old studies, they all had support from their family, from their, one had brother, she mentioned her brother, the husbands, the fathers. So in 10 years' time, we see research that said that women in this predominantly a Muslim country had very little support from male figures in the family for entrepreneurship to a lot of support. They all did admit that they saw that because it was home-based, that obviously this helped out with their balance in terms of family work balance, the children, etc. We saw that as they pursued what's called in the literature post-industrial opportunities. Being a digital entrepreneur helped these women go into software, selling other digital products, becoming, one was sort of a buyer with an electronics company and customers, was sort of the mid-person point in the supply chain. So we saw that because of the digital factor, they were able to pursue these post-industrial opportunities. They had family support, they had access to finance, and they had specialized knowledge in business planning. And those that did not went and pursued either short courses or certificate courses in business planning. They all have broken out of traditional markets. As I said, 6 of them have gone international and the others are working in that direction. We saw that they were all very organized in terms of having an entrepreneurial marketing plan. Now, previously in entrepreneurship research, before it went digital 10 or 15 years ago, many enterprises opened without any kind of entrepreneurial marketing plan. And of course, we would see within 2 years the high rate of bankruptcy. But I think the internet has forced people to look at, when they want to be entrepreneurial or start their own small business, that they must have a business plan. And particularly in this case, an entrepreneurial marketing plan. Entrepreneurial marketing brings us closer to the customer. This is one of the reasons that research shows that women tend to succeed in digital entrepreneurship. The closeness with the customer, the fact that women can be more engaging in terms of communication and have more ease with communication. And of course, with have more ease online with women, with customers as well. As we know, most of the consumers out there are women. So that we see that once they entered digital entrepreneurship, they became immersed in the internet market. They started, of course, with their success in the local market, and then they started to build digital identities within their marketing plan. And for 6 of these women, their digital identities on different forums and different associations on different platforms led to the internationalization of their online business. So we see that, just to sort of wrap it up here, these were the results of our study. And what we're hoping we have developed, and along with the help of using some of Professor Naveen's tools, assessment tools from his online digital entrepreneurship study in the UK, we developed a tool where what we did was narrative inquiry, narrative interviews, because we wanted to hear the stories. We didn't want to just gather quantitative statistics. We wanted to hear their stories, because this is a subject that's not very present in the literature. So of course, whenever you have very little research, it's always good to start qualitatively. What will the future hold? I think for all of these women, because we also interviewed them during COVID. And of course, they knew so many other people that had lost their jobs because of COVID, and they felt good that they were able to keep working. Some of their incomes did go down because of COVID, because their customers were unable to buy. and there were some changes in the supply chain, and they began to look at, that led them to other issues. For example, a couple of women had catering services. So when COVID came and a lot of their big wholesalers for food shut down or were not delivering, they looked into alternative food networks. And because they were digital entrepreneurs, that helped lead them to alternative food networks. So they were able to buy their supplies, even though the big multinational suppliers were having problems getting their products to the customers during the COVID shutdown. I think COVID has really changed everything, and I think the changes will continue. Hopefully COVID won't continue, but I think the way, we see the world moving, this will not be, I don't think this will be the last biological disaster event. I think we'll be more prepared for it next time, definitely. But certainly for entrepreneurs, digital will be the way to go more and more. I'm hoping that in our schools, in our colleges, even in high schools, universities, we see more taught about digital entrepreneurship. We now have a lot about entrepreneurship, but we need more on digital entrepreneurship. I'm going to stop here, and I would love to hear your thoughts, questions, any kind of conversation. It was a great study, and I'm hoping that in the future we're going to be able to replicate this study in other countries with women digital entrepreneurs. Right now, our results are only from UAE. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Daphne. Now I have a few comments, but before I go, I will allow my colleagues here to make questions. But I want to apologize for one thing. I forgot to introduce you.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I'm Daphne. So I'm a professor. Yeah, I'm a professor at the International School of Management in Paris, and I'm also a fellow at the Institute of Coaching at Harvard Medical School, where we're now doing a lot on digital entrepreneurship. A lot of seminars, a lot of research, and we're doing a lot of coaching with digital entrepreneurs as well. I edit some journals. I like to teach. I like to write. I have 3 children in graduate school who are presently at home because of COVID during their classes online. And I welcome your comments.
Thank you, Daphne. Do you have any questions for Professor Daphne? I will, okay, Ahmed Mbaydain, go ahead.
Thank you, Professor. I have a question. If your research covered the cross-cultural differences in women digital entrepreneurship, and how culture motivates and make the right environment for this kind of activities to flourish.
Yeah, Ahmed, that's a very good question. And let me just take it one by one. This is the beginning of a study in a modern Arab, predominantly Muslim country. The other studies have been done in the West. My hope is that we're going to do cross-cultural comparisons. My hope is that we'll be able to replicate this study for researchers that are interested in their countries to replicate the study. And hopefully after we get 8-10 countries together, we can do a big cross-cultural comparison. These kinds of studies take years to really come up with, what you're saying is sort of very important, and it's the final step. It takes 3 or 4 years to get there. I agree with you about the environment. These women were very motivated by the environment, although they did have barriers as well. They had some barriers for financing, especially when they wanted to go to internationalization. They needed more training with the business element of it, marketing, accounting, how to handle their taxes, a lot of things. Now, I'm not talking about businesses that are off the books. We all know there's a lot of these. But these women and digital entrepreneurs many digital entrepreneurs have, of course, the ambition to go international and become big. You can't do that and be off the books. So it can't just, it's part of the gig economy, but all of them were, except for two, all of them were part of the legal system. I think also what's very important, and research has shown this too, is the venture person fit. An entrepreneur has to have a certain kind of personality profile. A lot of people tell me, I want to be an entrepreneur. You're a coach. Tell me how I can do this. And I say, first, we have to talk about you, not the business. We have to talk about you, your psychological profile. Can you work on your own? One quote from one participant said, home can be the most peaceful place and the most lonely place, which, you know, many of us with COVID lockdowns have seen that. So I think that's the first step. When somebody wants to be an entrepreneur, especially if they have the ambition to go big, I think first they need to go talk to a consultant, to coach somebody and find out if this is for them, because we see many bankruptcies. Because people say, oh, I have a great idea. I see a market opportunity. I've got the equipment at home. I'm going to get started, without realizing what it takes to really run a one-person digital enterprise. And the first step is personality, certain personality characteristics. Ahmed, have I answered your question?
Yes, thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you. That was a good question. It covered a lot of grounds.
Yeah, Daphne, I have a question. Your study was done in the Arab Gulf, which is mostly conservative when it comes to women. The culture is conservative. Now, will digital entrepreneurship help them just bypass that barrier, bridge that gap?
Yeah, remember that all of these are home-based. That's where we see the big boom, home-based digital entrepreneurship. And I think that's why it also appeals to women a great deal, because, you know, yes, some women have come from the workplace. Other women, because of cultural, you know, because of their culture, they have been isolated or unable to leave the home in many reasons. That's just the case also in developing countries. But in the Arab Gulf, which, as you said, is a conservative area, but I would love to see this done in other Arab countries too, because the UAE is a little bit different in terms of the multi-ethnic population. And in the 20 women, we had 4 Emiratis. It was very difficult to find Emirati women doing digital entrepreneurship. But we did find, as I said, we targeted Arab women. You're right about the conservative part, but I think that just helps the whole situation for these women because it's home-based.
Okay. Majdi, do you have a question, Majdi?
Professor Bakr, you asked the question I wanted to ask, but I want to elaborate more on this. And do you think, Professor Daphne, in KSA, in UAE, and other Gulf countries, that governments would support the women, or do they have a role in supporting the women as entrepreneurs, like what we have in KSA?
Yeah, very good question.
The Crown Prince, yeah.
Yeah, this was a very good question, and it was in our recommendations for policy at the end of this study, which is just being finished up now, the writing of the study, is that the government has to help more in terms of providing support for these women, beginning with technological education, beginning with business education, and finance as well. Now, maybe some of you those of you from Jordan, is that the case there? In your country, do women have support from the government? Are there policies to help them in terms of entrepreneurship?
In Jordan, yes, they have funds. And they both.
But I think it's almost the same, Professor, no? Same as, not for women, for men and women.
You know, but there's a special fund for women, and as a result, about 35,000 women almost went to jail because of small amount, less than 500 each. It was not managed properly. صندوق المرأة, if you. Doctor, I have question about this digital entrepreneurship. And younger generation, older generation of mothers, what will the older generation do? Is there a digital divide here?
I'm sorry, Dr. Baker, I didn't hear you. Did you say the older generation?
Yeah, there were mothers working at home, and younger mothers and older mothers. And is there some kind of a digital divide here? Because
Yes, I agree with you. There is a digital, first of all, you have to be in an area that has really good, stable internet access. Okay, that's very important right there. Then you have to have the equipment, although the equipment is far more cost effective than opening something online. But we see also that it's a matter of training and education as well. You know, we saw that the women digital entrepreneurs in the studies in America, in the UK, and now in Dubai, there was another study done in Lebanon too, a few years ago. They tended to be more educated, speak English, because of course English is the language of the internet, especially if they wanted to reach a wider audience. And that's the point of going on the internet, to throw out a wider net there. And did have financial support from most of them, their family. You said that there were funds in Jordan for women entrepreneurs. This is something that needs to, and I saw that we had a speaker on another day that was an angel investor, or talked about angel investor networks. And those are slowly starting to build up now for women digital entrepreneurs. But digital entrepreneurship is not just the future, it's the present. And we were sort of pushed into it because of COVID. But now it's taken on. And more women get involved. As I said, some of our women were in their 40s and 50s. I think it's a matter of, you've got to have the stable internet access. And then you have to have some of these other things. You have to be proficient in English, in technology, even though it's basic technology, and business. Now, some of the women, like this one woman, also had her brother helping her. Okay, and because she had gone to university for marketing, he had gone to university for accounting, they sort of pooled their family resources together.
Okay, I think we still have 2 more questions if you have time. Do you have time?
Yes, of course.
Is it Ahmed or Majdi? No.
Okay.
Sorry, Professor, this was a old one.
Yes,
Okay,
I
Ahmed?
have a question. I'm interested in how the sampling has been done, and what is the characteristics of the sample? How many of them were doing business before, and the current situation accelerated their digital transformation, and how many moved into this as a newcomer when COVID hit? And I'm interested in what time frame your research conducted.
Our research was conducted during COVID in 2020. Okay. Early 2020, and through the summer as well of 2020. Obviously, as a qualitative, as a narrative study with a small sample, this was done with purposeful sampling. We had some criteria, like they were online entrepreneurs for a period of 2 years. They were females that were between these and these ages. There were specific criterion sampling. And of course, like in many qualitative studies, we use network sampling and snowball sampling. One woman would introduce our researcher to another, because, and this is important, there are no formal institutions or associations. There were no formal ones for women entrepreneurs, women digital entrepreneurs. And some of these women actually had gone on Facebook and formed a community on Facebook to be sort of like a business association for women digital entrepreneurs in the UAE. But that's a start. That's a start from there to getting incorporated and becoming a real business association. but they have those things in mind. So now your question, I really cannot remember all the details. When it's published, you'll read it. But I would say out of the 20, almost half of them were already working out in the corporate world, and they decided they wanted to change. They didn't like the gender restrictions. They didn't like the economic restrictions. They didn't like that they were doing more work than their male peers and getting less pay. There were very few opportunities for promotion for women into more middle management or leadership positions. So they wanted to leave, like a lot of entrepreneurs do, not just women. They wanted to leave the employment world and go into the entrepreneurial world.
Nice. Is there an interesting observations you noticed while conducting the study, like some industries do well with women's in digital, or there is regulation facilitated moving into an areas? Is there an interesting statistics or observations you noticed while conducting the study?
If you look at all the studies, including our study, whether it's men or women, digital entrepreneurs, they have to identify a market opportunity. That's it. You got to get out and do your pre-business market research and identify an opportunity. The other factor is speed. You have to be ready and you have to be fast to move forward. So some people get the idea. One woman had actually started 2 businesses before this third one took off, which was successful, but she said that too. She was not ready. So readiness and speed, especially if you want to go international. I mean, if you look at all the research about born global corporations and internationalization, even of small businesses, speed is a big factor.
We'll take one final question from Majdi. Go ahead, Majdi.
Okay, thank you.
Majdi, you raised your hand?
Yes, Professor. Yes, I have one question.
Ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Yes. As you mentioned, Professor Daphne, your study was based on women started their business from home, right? So I believe there's a lack of
all of this. Right, all of this is home-based. That's the big jump, especially in COVID, is home-based digital entrepreneurship.
Yes. My question is, I believe there's lack of incubators in GCC countries and Arab countries overall. Do you think if we have more like incubators or let's say corporates or institutions that provide services or facilitate the home-owned businesses, do you think that the number of home-based businesses will go higher, either for women or men?
Look, I definitely think that everything begins with education. You know, even if you're in high school and you're teaching, you know, in many schools, even elementary schools, they do little entrepreneurial projects with the kids. You have to open up people's minds from a young age that this is out there, that you can be that there is digital entrepreneurship. It can be home-based. And then the places of education and finance, whether it's companies, banks, fintech, you name it, colleges, universities, incubators are very important because they bring people together. And you know, the home can be very isolating as well. And this is something that some of the women said, is that, you know, that's why they all went on Facebook and formed this little association, and they meet through Facebook live streaming. That there needs to be more, as you would say, incubators, associations, community support networks in home-based digital entrepreneurship for digital entrepreneurs that are working from home. I have to agree with you completely on that.
Thank you so much, Professor Daphne, for an amazing presentation today. It's always a pleasure listening to you. And then I hope we'll get a chance, you and I, to talk next week about your paper and how we can replicate
Let's
it.
talk
And-
about, yes. And let's
And
talk
about-
about publishing,
and
publishing
about
all our the great books. And if anyone is interested at any point on replicating our study with a group of home-based digital entrepreneur women in your countries, just get in touch with me, let me know.
I'm sure we can do that for you.
It's always a pleasure. And I just want to thank Dr. Baker, because if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have GIMAC at all. He's the driving force. He's the soul. Okay, we work with you, but you're the soul of this. And
bless you,
okay, and I appreciate everyone participating, and it's nice to see. I recognize the women in their photographs from your course.
Thank you so much, Daphne. Thank you. And hopefully
okay, everyone, take care. Hope to see you again
Bye.
soon. Bye-bye.